Hi, and welcome to our Teen Anxiety and Depression webinar. I know this can be a really difficult topic to address, especially with so much at stake when we deal with mental illness. We think about how much our teens are starting to deal with on a daily basis, especially in the times that we're dealing with right now. But we think about things like societal troubles and things like bullying, things like increased violence, things like ultimately at the end of this, we're seeing increased rates in teen suicide. And these are all really, really scary things to have to think about, which is why we want to bring you maybe a different perspective that we can look through, a different lens that we can look through, and maybe shed some light on what might be going on the inside for a lot of the kids and in our families and in our communities. We're going to be going through some different types of stress today that our kids and our communities are dealing with, whether it's physical stress or chemical stress, emotional stress. And we're going to talk about specific presentations that we're starting to see, whether it be anxiety or depression or one leading into the other, and what we can start to look for and how we can start to identify, and then ultimately what we can do about it, what you can do about it, and possibly even how we might be able to help you navigate some of this as we move forward. Right now we're in kind of some very uncertain times and certainly things that I've never dealt with, and I think according to everyone that we're continuing to see in our office, that the vast majority of our community has never dealt with this viral pandemic that's happening, with schools being shut down, with kids being forced to learn school at home, being isolated more than ever, being not only self-isolation, which so many of these kids do personally, but also a forced isolation where they don't get to have the social interaction that they typically would have. They don't get to have the mentorship. They don't get to have the personal in-person connection with teachers and friends and family and what ultimately can be the resources that they need. So tune in with us. My name is Dr. Jeremy Pfau. I'm a chiropractor here at Experience Wellness Chiropractic in Plymouth, Minnesota. And I just want to share with you what we've seen over the years dealing with this population of teens. It's one of my absolute favorite populations to work with, because we can see kids really open up in a pretty short period of time when we look at things a different way, and when we start to teach kids how their bodies and how their brains and how their nervous systems really work and what might be interfering with that process. I have a really cool success story that we're going to talk about today as well that I want to share with you. I want to give you just some concrete, testimonials. This is really what's happening. This is what we see here in our office. And then at the end, if you want, throw some questions on here as well, and we'll look to answer as many questions as we can through the chat box or through comments. Even after this is done, we'd love to continue to be a resource for any of you as well. So I want to start first digging into anxiety and depression a little bit, and talk about what they are, how they're defined. Maybe you're new to this. Maybe you're just starting to see some things manifest, and you haven't gone down the whole process of seeing specialists. Right now, maybe it's new as all of this stress starts to unfold and new stress starts to pile up, and you're starting to see behaviors that haven't been there before, or maybe are getting magnified. We want to get out ahead of it. So if that's the case, here's some things that we get to look for. So when we look at anxiety, it's a general term for disorders that cause nervousness, fear, apprehension, and worrying. These affect how we feel and behave, and can have some really physical manifestations as well. It's really a safety mechanism for our body. When we look at what anxiety truly is, it isn't a mechanism as a problem. It isn't that this one thing is wrong. It's a perception that is wrong, right? Anxiousness and anxiety is our body's response to a perception of stress, right? It's our body's internal stress response saying something isn't right that I need to worry about. It's really a survival mechanism, right? It's our body going into a state of survival or a state of fight or flight because of a perception of what's going on around us. And almost always that perception is inaccurate, right? It's it's a misperception of stress that isn't reality. So it's us going, or our kids going, I'm really worried about this situation without the situation really being accurate. So it's this state of fight, flight, survival mode that happens at the wrong time. You think, what is fight or flight, right? Fight or flight is our physiologic response inside of us that triggers when we need to run away from stress, we need to physically confront stress, and we need to survive. This is like, ingrained in us as an unbelievable tool for survival, but it isn't always beneficial to us when it's triggered at the wrong time, or if it's triggered in a sustained fashion, if it's always on, if our bodies are always stuck and locked in this fight or flight response. No wonder why we're anxious all the time, because it becomes so easy for our bodies to trigger anxiety when we're already feeling fight or flight, when our body's already stuck in this fight or flight state. It becomes very, very easy for stress to get stuck on all of the time. And then we move into what is depression, and depression is a mental health disorder characterized by a persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities, causing significant impairment in our daily life or their daily lives. Oftentimes for us, we see this start to settle in the later teen years. We see kids that are dealing with anxiety first. It's really, really common. We do this webinar together because it's so common for one to lead into the other, that we see high stress and high anxiety and worry, and those things persist over a long enough period of time that our bodies can't keep up, our bodies can't sustain that level of response to stress, and then the energy just goes low. We see it usually in our office between 15 and 17 years old versus the anxiousness and anxiety that starts before that. And really we're seeing these kids they're adapting and they're fighting off this stress response for a long time, and their body just can't keep up. It becomes exhausted and their energy levels just tank, and they just go low energy for a long period of time. And so we see this, people go, well, what are some of the signs and what are these stressors that we talk about? Well, we talk about 3 different types of stress within our environment, within our bodies, that we have to adapt to in order for us to really thrive, right? In our office, we look at 2 words. We look at adaptability in order to thrive, right? If our bodies are able to simply adapt to the ongoing environment and stress that's around us, which means, we can adapt to a physical environment via, maybe we're sitting too much all day long, and we can adapt, and we adapt physically to sports, we adapt physically to postural situations, all those different physical things that our bodies are meant to adapt to. And if we can, and our muscle system's holding up well, and we're really having good posture and form and all of that, then our body doesn't really manifest physical stress and symptoms. We have emotional stress, which right now I think is the biggest thing that any of us, it doesn't matter if you're a kid or a teenager or an adult, right now we're in unprecedented amounts of emotional and mental stress, and really it's due to uncertainty. We're seeing so many kids that are missing school, wondering, when do I get to go back? We're seeing kids that are forced into a completely different learning environment that they aren't necessarily, adequate at navigating through, and it can be really, really stressful for them. It's a whole, what's next on the agenda for school? Is it going to open up this year? Are they going to get to see their friends again this year? There's stress in the household because parents are now working from home and trying to teach, and maybe there's little ones, maybe there's all of this different stress that we're dealing with that really starts to build up. On top of that, we're dealing with more screen time than ever before, more social media than ever before, different time management needs, that it really just starts to add up and add up and add up. And then another thing that we are really seeing right now is this chemical stress of things coming into our body. So think about the eating habits of a structured day when you get up and you have breakfast, and then you go to school and there's lunch, and then maybe there's a snack after school and there's dinner. One thing we're hearing pretty consistently right now is that there's constant intake of food, right? You're at home, the refrigerator's right there, the snack cupboard's right there. There was just Easter, so there might be, candy everywhere and sugar, and people make make poor decisions when we're under stress. People crave more highly addictive foods like sugar and junk food when we're under stress because it triggers our body's physiology differently. So these are all things that just continue to pile on and pile on. And I'm going to go back to our physical stress for a minute because it just popped into my head to retouch on this. So that nowadays we're not even sitting in desks and ergonomic, hopefully ergonomic seats like parents that are in typically have a nice office chair or kids that are in desks at school. Now a lot of the learning is being done. Maybe it's at a kitchen table where it's a bench and kids are leaning over, or maybe they're sitting back on a couch and they're clicking with something in their lap. And so all of a sudden our entire postural shift is happening where we're seeing people are really dealing with a lot more soreness and a lot more flare-ups of physical aches and pains because of the different ergonomics now that we're dealing with the situation. So now we have all of this stress that's happening, and our body has to now adapt to it in order to attempt to thrive. And what's going on is if our body is thought of like a 5-gallon bucket, right? You can only hold 5 gallons of this stress, whether it's physical stress, whether it's emotional stress, whether it's chemical stress. And if you only have 5 gallons worth of space for all of this stress, and you start throwing in additional emotional stress in the household and in the school system and in our education and all of that from what's going on, we start to add in the fear of what's going on around us in the world and the uncertainty, and then you start to go, okay, maybe we're not eating as well as we used to anymore. It's really easy to see that this bucket is going to overflow a lot quicker than it used to. So we're seeing a lot of kids starting to manifest more anxiousness than they were before. And it makes perfect sense because we're literally overflowing, right? Our bodies can't adapt fast enough to the amount of stress that we're throwing at it right now. So it's a matter of, well, what do we really do about it, right? In our office, we are a neurologically based chiropractic office. So if you're familiar with us, if you're a patient of ours, you know what that means. It means our technique of adjusting is very different. But even before that, our analysis is very different. Meaning we have a secret weapon on stress in our office, and it's this guy right here. This is called heart rate variability, and this is the window into your body's reserve. This test right here, heart rate variability, gives us an idea of where is your bucket right now and how are you adapting to stress. It tells us, are you completely drained? Does your body have the resources to manage the environment that you're currently under or not? And if you don't, chances are those patterns of stress are stuck in your nervous system, and chiropractic is going to be the perfect thing to start to unwind that stress and start to open it up. Almost like, taking I'll use my glass of water here, right? If this is full of water and we have a spigot on the bottom, if we can just open up that spigot and let the stress flow out, that's what chiropractic does in a sense of opening up your capacity to adapt to stress. So now that we know what we do, we look at how do we measure, we look at what are the stressors we're dealing with, what are we seeing in this teen anxiety as far as presentation. So this kind of goes across the board, but even more so with what we're dealing with right now. When we look at the presentation of teen anxiety, I want you to think about stress in almost like avoidance behaviors and shutdown. That fight, flight, almost like freeze response can be very, very real. These are oftentimes very high achievers or overachievers, right? They have a very high pressure to succeed, and they'll do anything to do that, which means late nights and lack of sleep. In our older populations of kids and later in high school and college, sometimes that means the use of substances, whether it's caffeine or medications, in order to consistently achieve at a high level. Oftentimes we see these kiddos exhausted all of the time. They're up late. That worry, that drain, that fight or flight mechanism that's triggered all the time is extremely draining to our nervous system. It's extremely draining to our reserves. These kids are exhausted all of the time. They're sleepy. Oftentimes means that they're dealing with immune challenges all the time. They're constantly dealing with colds. They're dealing with allergies. They're dealing with congestion. Their system is really wore down. Their reserve is so low that they can't respond to everything else that they need to around them. They're not wanting to open up, right? They're not wanting to engage in conversations. Maybe they used to be more chatty with you. Maybe they used to talk more at family dinners, and now they're very, very, very reserved. They're spending a whole lot more time shut in their room and isolated and self-isolation. They become emotionally unpredictable, right? When our stress capacity is at its peak, it becomes very easy to trigger that anxiousness stress response, almost like an emotional blow up. That's like overflowing of stress. And for kids that have a hard time understanding and managing their own emotional state, sometimes that just means that the emotions just flow. We start to see these kids dealing with more negative self-esteem, more negative self-talk, low confidence for what we see as no reason, right? So many times we see teens that deal with anxiety that are, like we said, they're high achievers, they're high performers, but they have such a harsh self-criticism that their self-esteem becomes really low. And then they start to, possibly even move into coping mechanisms, like we said, some substance abuse issues later in that, but also attention-seeking things negatively can happen as well. So those are the things that we really start to see with anxiety. And then when we look at depression, it's almost like, where does that lead to? And we talked about some of it being emotional blow-ups and not wanting to open up, and then it moves into some isolation, and that's where we see it come into that next step of depressive behavior, which becomes really an increase in being withdrawn, an increase in that tiredness and fatigue and rundown, sleeping past their alarm clocks, missing school, missing work. They're fatigued all of the time, so they really are starting to show that in their behaviors. Their performance in school starts to hinder. Lack of participation in everything. Right now in this environment that we're in, we're not seeing that because they don't have any participation in almost anything, because our environment is dictating isolation, which means we need to have an even more keen awareness as parents and as providers and in our community on making sure that we're staying in tune with these kiddos. Self-confidence and self-worth really becomes even lower. We start to see a lot of negativity. We can even have self-harm that comes into play with this, and really it becomes a lack of coping mechanisms in how to handle any of it, right? There's no hope for them to get better. They just feel like they're stuck and they don't have a way out. And it becomes this mindset of, something happened to me, like there's a shift. So many times we hear from parents say, this isn't who they used to be, right? They used to be this, funny, happy, kind of bubbly, and then all of this kind of built up, and then we'll have to say something happened. I mean, parents can oftentimes see it too, but the kids will tell us, they'll say, I don't know what happened, but something changed. And that change is that fight or flight mechanism that gets stuck on for so long that their body physiologically shifts. It shifts in the way that it can handle and respond to stress. So what does that look like in our office? Why am I on here? Why is a chiropractor on here talking about anxiety and depression and mental health and all of those things? The reason is because we see kids change when they start to get adjusted. We see adults change. We see people start to change when they start to get adjusted, when their nervous system, which is the system that we're talking about through all of this, your nervous system is what you navigate life through, right? You live your entire life through your nervous system. You perceive your environment through your nervous system, and then your brain coordinates a proper response that it then sends back out through your nervous system to engage with the world. And when we see kids overflow with stress, when we see adults and parents overflow with stress, think of it almost like your circuit breaker in your house, right? When it gets overloaded with stress, something shifts and something pops, something moves, something gets stuck where it can no longer process the environment the way that it used to, and it becomes stuck in a stressful mode. And that's where we measure. That's when we go, okay, we need to get some data and go, what's really happening within your nervous system? Before we talk about actually I'm not going to go into our story just quite yet. I want to talk about the kids that we see and kind of how they process through these things, because it can happen at any age. We see younger and younger kids now dealing with anxiety and ability to process things like sensory processing disorder. We have that as a diagnosis with a lot of the kids that come into our office. And these kids are dealing with a lot of stress. They have no real coping mechanisms for it, but they also have no awareness of the stress that they're under, right? When we see younger kids, they don't really have an awareness that says, this is really stressful for me. They simply can't manage what's happening around them. So it looks like, extreme emotional behaviors and tantrums and inability to express what's going on. When we work in with stress, when we work into the teen population, now all of a sudden there is an awareness of stress, right? Kids are starting to understand that this stress is starting to affect them, but their coping mechanisms are immature. They have unhealthy habits of how they do it, meaning we talked about isolation, we talked about food, we talked about lack of exercise, really they shut in, and now all of a sudden their coping mechanisms to manage their stress starts to progress further the struggles that they're dealing with. And then as adults, I always like to push into this next piece of it, because as adults we have an awareness of the stress that's around us. We have an awareness that we are stressed for the most part. We know what's going on. We know we're not managing it well. And we have more mature coping mechanisms, but sometimes those coping mechanisms are unhealthy habits that just become acceptable today in society. Whether it's too much caffeine or too much alcohol, right? We have to use something to pick us up in the morning, then we need something to bring us back down. Or maybe it's medication, or maybe it's over-the-counter medication, or maybe it's food, like we said. And that need for the junk food right now as we're all locked in. I can't tell you, I think I just saw something come through that food delivery services are up 38% on people that are ordering dessert since they've ever had. Not just what people are, or when people are ordering, the amount of food people are ordering, but 38% increase in people ordering dessert right now versus what was happening before. So it becomes this, it's an acceptable part of society for adults to do this, but for kids, we know just how dangerous it can be when we start to pile on the stress load that they're unable to deal with. So, like I said, chiropractic, our role is simply to remove the interference from a stuck nervous system, from a subluxated nervous system is what we call it. A subluxation is an interference from the way your body perceives and coordinates a response to the world around it. So I want to talk to you about a young girl that started with us just last fall. At the end of last fall was her very first appointment with us, and it was exactly this, right? This is the exact pattern of behaviors that we were seeing. On the health goals for your child, our mom wrote improved focus and motivation, help with anxiety and depression, and improved pain levels. So physical issues, we're dealing with mental issues, and then we're dealing with focus and ability to be motivated. So we're starting to see a lot of the things already that we're dealing with. And I love in our office, we actually have the kids fill out their own progress assessment. So 1 month into her chiropractic care, nothing else was changed for her at this time. And we look at, what is it? Primary health objectives, better focus, less anxious, and better coordination. All three improved. 5 out of 5 improvement on better focus within a month of changing the way your nervous system is processing. We look at less anxious. We're at a 4 out of 5 improvement on being less anxious. She has sleep, energy levels, and family life all checked off as things that have improved. But then it says, tell us any new or health challenges that you're dealing with or stress in your life. It says, I don't know how to handle stress or anxiety. So she's starting to become more aware of this stuff that's happening around her and her inability to adapt to it, which we always find super cool when kids start to have more body and self-awareness of what's happening around them. 1 month later, we're starting to see better digestion, better postural awareness, and less stress on the things that are being checked off. And under new and health challenges or stressors or things you're becoming aware of, it says, I'm more aware of my posture and I feel better. We said, what feedback and comments have you heard from family and friends since beginning care? And it says, better mood. So parents are starting to go, you're happier. You seem like more of yourself, which just brings so much joy to us to be able to help families with that. And then the last progress exam, which was the end of our initial care plan, which is a 3-month care plan to start to repattern and I shouldn't say us repattern, but release those stuck patterns and help her body reorganize and rebuild into a stronger, more efficient state, right? Stronger, more efficient way that the nervous system can work and process. And it says new things and new challenges or new things that are happening. She's better patterns and habits in my head, meaning she's starting to focus, and she's starting to see that what she's doing can have an outcome on the way that she's behaving or the way that her body is processing. So let's see what else. Sleeping better mood, fewer illnesses, less pain when I'm moving. I mean, these are all amazing things for a 15-year-old girl that her mom's head was starting to really come out of her shell. She was always isolating herself. She spent too much time, all of the time, on her phone in her room, and really isolated. And to be able to start to see families come back together and start to have those conversations, simply because she started getting adjusted. We started changing the way her neurology was working within her system, and she was able to start to heal. Now, are we saying that chiropractic is the cure for anxiety and depression? Absolutely not. We tend to not really talk so much about the diagnosis actually in our office, because we don't want to have kids come in saying, this is my label and this is me. So we tend to stay away from most of that here, and we really look at potential, and we look at adaptability, and we talk about your nervous system and where you are on this state of fight or flight. If you're just tuning in with us, we're talking about heart rate variability, which is a test that we do in our office that measures where we are at and possibly stuck in this fight, flight, rest, and digest state of stress. And if you're stuck chronically in a fight or flight state, chances are that anxiety is something you deal with, because it immediately increases your perception of stress on a moment-by-moment basis. So what is it about the chiropractic adjustment that really helps? Well, it gets you out of this stuck stress mode for one, but it increases your own body's self-awareness. So now all of a sudden you start to feel what it's like to just feel normal. And all of a sudden you start to go, okay, if I'm going to be feeling better and better, I'm going to start to make better and better choices. So one of the cool side effects that we see with chiropractic care, and when your nervous system starts to unwind and we start to heal, is that we start to make better choices, because we feel better when we make better choices. So it helps the organization, and it helps coping, and it helps adaptability to stress, which ultimately creates different results than being stuck in stress. So if we're stuck in fight or flight stress mode, your results are pretty predictable about where you're gonna go. But if you're not, think about the potential that means for our kids and for our families. If this sounds like a teen in your life, if this sounds like a child that you live with, if it sounds like someone in your family, contact our office. I know times are a little bit different right now as far as just being out and about, but I want to help in any way we can. So I'd love to start with a phone consult. I'd love to start with a conversation and find out how we can best help you, how we can best serve your family. If you're not local to the Minneapolis, we're in the West Metro of Minneapolis. If you're not local to here, you can search for a provider in the National Family Wellness Alliance. It's a nonprofit that we work directly with to make sure that we have connections all over the United States and parts of Canada, that we can find providers for you to do the work just like we do here, to make sure that we get help for you and your family. So if that's the case, go on to, again, it's the National Family Wellness Alliance. You just type in your zip code, and they'll give you the closest chiropractor to you that works the way that we work. So I hope you enjoyed our webinar today. I hope you found this helpful for you and your family to help navigate these uncertain times, and ultimately to help your kids and to help your families be the absolute best you can be, to help improve your potential, improve your adaptability, so that you can all thrive. So reach out if we can help you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments below, and we'll look forward to hearing from you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.